environment. So we at the NUT Center for Social Innovation wanted to bring in a voice from the ecosystem who can tell us how their worldview has shifted and what are they doing about it. I welcome Kruti Barucha, the founder of People, an organization that is building exemplar education ecosystem in government systems. Welcome, Kruti.
Thank you so much, Priya. Lovely to be
Uh,
here.
yes, I look forward to this conversation with you. So for the audience, we have the way we thought we would do this session is that we would do a Q&A type of session. I have a couple of questions that I will ask Kruti. And if any of you have a question, there is a small Q&A tab at the bottom. You can send us your questions, and time permits, we will pick up a few of those questions as well. So first of all, Kruti, let's start with talking about People, how the organization started, how your journey has evolved over the years, and what were you working towards in the pre-COVID era?
Sure. I am just going to pull up a couple of slides
Yeah,
just to kind of visually represent a bit about People.
sure.
Just to give you all a sense on the call, maybe I can just share a little bit about my own journey. So I worked in the corporate sector for about 15 years, decided to make the transition to the nonprofit sector in 2013, and joined an organization called ARC India as their country director in 2014. We spun off to create People as a fully Indian entity. We realized the challenges of quality education in India, also had the ambition to not only work at a micro level, but also have impact at scale. And so People was, was created in 2017 with the vision to help every child in India reach their potential. So that's really kind of the basis of, that's our fundamental belief as an organization. So we are an education nonprofit. We work in 2 states primarily, New Delhi and Madhya Pradesh. We have extensive operations in both. As many folks on the line will know, India has about 1.3 million schools, of which 10% of those are located in Madhya Pradesh. So although we say, only 2 states, as you think about working across the entire state of Madhya Pradesh, you're looking at impacting between 8 to 10% of the total number of schools in India. So we've been, quite determined also in the bets that we make and the way in which we approach our programs and our work. We have focused very much on improving and revitalizing, rejuvenating the government school system. And the reason we do that is essentially because our demographic or the children that are most vulnerable and at risk are from the poorest of the poor families. And because government schools are fee-free and also have many benefits like meals and scholarships associated with them, oftentimes the poorest children do study in government schools. But not all government schools provide high quality education. So our intention is to make sure that every child actually is able to reach his or her potential, and to really work with strengthening existing systems, existing government school systems, rather than creating parallel structures outside of the government. That's a little bit about People's vision, mission, and presence. Let me move to what we actually do. So as some of you will, and some of you on the call are nonprofit leaders. Some are from our leading CSR departments, working on multiple programs across multiple sectors. Given that we work in education, we have and given that we have the ambition to scale our work within the government school system, we soon realized that just going intervention by intervention wasn't going to be sufficient to actually transform education ecosystems. So what we have focused on is the core that we want to improve within government, which is to create meaningful teacher-student interaction. So at the core of what we want to change is really student engagement. It's the way that a teacher and a student interact with each other in a government school classroom or a government school. So it's as opposed to rote learning, it's actually saying how do you actually engage a child meaningfully? How do you track their progress? How do you ensure that um, you know children, you're not just catering to the average child, you're also catering to a child that may need additional support, or you maybe you need to cater to a child that might be ahead of their class. And so you can't necessarily apply a one size fits all solution in the classroom. And a lot of the secret sauce lies in the way that a teacher and a student need to engage and interact. To make that change happen, if that's the fundamental change that we want to see, the way in which we believe that change should happen is through um, four different interventions. Um, as we think about shifting the needle on creating great quality government schools, the first is to actually show what is possible. So a visual exemplar, by showing the excellence that's possible, you actually build belief and you build the hope and you build the relatability to the excellence and the um, raising the bar on the expectations of the government school system. So in Delhi, for example, we run 3 partnership schools with the government, where we've actually partnered with the South Delhi Municipal Corporation, taken on corporation schools, made them centers of excellence and innovation labs, but in a way that is replicable and scalable. So at the same cost as what the government spends on one of their schools, we have created public-private partnership schools and visual exemplars, where learning outcomes are significantly higher, but at the same cost per child. And what that has allowed for is uh, the belief that it is possible. So the visual exemplar, when you see it happen, you believe that it can be done. And so we've had a lot of visitors come and see the school from various state governments. We've had um, civil servants, foundations, CSR representatives come and see it, and then take back learnings and think about how to actually support and replicate that model. As we think about now, a visual exemplar is kind of the micro side, and it's the practitioner aspect of what we do as an organization. But a large part of what needs to happen when you work at scale is the how to make that happen within a government school setting. So the visual exemplar for us is a lot around the what. What do you need to see? What does excellence look like? What does raising the bar really mean? So the exemplar gets to the what, but the other elements of this wheel, the teacher training, the mentoring, and the monitoring, get to the how to make that happen within the government school system. So if we think about, for example, if I think about an ecosystem as a municipal corporation or a district, I look at teacher training for that entire district, teacher training and teacher development. I think about mentoring and coaching the principals and the school teachers by working with the block academic coordinators and the cluster academic coordinators. And then I look at monitoring, creating avenues of accountability, using data, looking at what's working, creating kind of two-way feedback loops. And so the other 3 interventions are a lot around the how can we actually make this happen in a government school setting. So this is the heart of what we do at People. As we think about Delhi, we're looking at our work in the South Delhi Municipal Corporation was creating those visual exemplars, teacher training and teacher development. And then we had begun work on the mentoring and monitoring side across the 581 schools in Delhi. Madhya Pradesh has 115,000 schools and 270,000 teachers. And our initial plan was to work at 2 layers, one at the district layer, where we would implement all these four aspects of building an education ecosystem and create almost an exemplar district. But at the second layer, we were also going to work with the state government to actually roll out some of these interventions at scale. So, for example, what does a strong, high quality teacher development, teacher training program look like? You can make that happen. You can show the exemplar in a district. Then you can also create teacher development rubrics, modules, capabilities that can be implemented at scale. So for us, the ecosystem is very layered. It's at the level of the corporation, the district, the state, and then the national level. Um, so I will stop there, Priya. I can always go on a lot about what we do at People, but I'll stop there because otherwise I'll use up the rest of the 45 minutes that we have.
Thank you so much for giving that detailed journey and talking about your work. Um, so a lot of your work is on the ground. What do you see as immediate impact on your work? And possibly also the same for others in the education sector, from the perspective of access to your users, which is children, teacher, government systems, as well as access to funding.
Yeah, so COVID has COVID has certainly changed many things for education sector organizations, right? Because schools are actually closed. Teachers are not, teaching their students directly. Students are not in a classroom setting. They're not able to, they're not able to be taught, especially children who are from the most vulnerable communities. So as an organization, I think we've had to pivot in terms of how we're going to be solving education challenges at this time, right? And I would say that we've, to some extent, tried to, be agile and for the, for the next 3 to 6 months, really try to think about what is going to have most impact on the ground as we deal with the current situation where schools are actually closed. Interestingly, what that's meant is that a lot of our programs are actually now scaling faster than they were originally because there has been such interest from state governments to actually act quickly and respond to the situation. So whether that's direct outreach to students or whether that's teacher training, governments are mobilizing themselves and asking for support. What it's meant for us immediately is to say, previously we were looking at geographies and looking at how to create these ecosystems. We've actually now created task forces for ourselves in the organization. And we feel that that's a way to actually have significant impact as we look at the next 3 months. So the first task force is really around direct community support and outreach. Now, as an organization, all of the work, most of the work that we do is around teaching and learning, but we realize very quickly that the families that we work with, I would say we did a survey, only about 50 to 50% of parents actually had access to a smartphone because many of them were actually disconnecting their data connections because they didn't have money to pay for ration. Right? So in that context, how can you even reach out to students with teaching material when you're not even able to get to more than 50% of that student population? So the first short-term task force that we created was actually to figure out ways in which we could provide community support. Right? So this was direct to communities and families, working through partners, so Give India, Zomato, Feeding India, working through existing initiatives that people had started to actually make sure that the families were getting support from the broader nonprofit ecosystem, as well as CSR and individuals who wanted to help and support. Right? So that was short term. But we didn't want to take our eye off the ball in terms of ensuring that the children were also getting access to learning because children from middle class, upper middle class, wealthier families are actually able to access learning because they have They have laptops, they have access to computers, and many private schools have now activated digital learning. But when you're working with vulnerable families, that's not a reality. And so that digital divide worsens and actually leads to learning gaps, and children actually not getting access to learning through their teachers. So in the medium term, the second task force that we set up was around reach and teach, which is to actually figure out how to, not only for the 1100 children at the 3 people schools that we directly impact, but also for the broader South Delhi Municipal Corporation, which has 6,000 teachers. How can we create structures where we are giving and enabling and facilitating material that teachers can actually directly disseminate to children in the context of the reality of low penetration of data, even if they have data, low bandwidth connections. So given all of those realities, how can you send short material that is engaging, where you can actually create feedback, you can provide homework? And so our medium term effort has really been on making sure that education doesn't get discontinued for the most vulnerable children. And I've seen a lot of other nonprofits also try to make strides in this direction, because now a lot of kind of edtech companies and other nonprofits have opened up their material and kind of put them on digital platforms. So suddenly there is a lot of material available. And the immediate initiatives that organizations are taking are to actually figure out how can you get the right content out to children, so that you can continue their learning. The third way that I think about a COVID response is also keeping in mind the long term, right? And this is where I think sustainability, CSR, also wants to have a significant impact, which is immediate community relief measures, but also making sure that over the medium term and long term, you're continuing to have sustainable impact on those communities. Because when the lockdown does end, and when we do deal with the challenges of rebuilding some of these systems, how are we actually preparing ourselves now to deal with those longer term issues that are going to arise? And so the one of the steps that we've put in place there is, given that teachers are actually not teaching at the moment and they have this time on their hands and they're at home, how can we actually change the fundamental capacity and ability of the teacher community? So in Madhya Pradesh, for example, we are very much focused on a e-training curriculum, where we're reaching out to about 300,000 teachers across the entire state, across all of their schools, and we're pulling forward. And that's what I meant about just scaling our work much faster than we thought. And this provides a disruptive opportunity for us to be able to do that. And so when the lockdown ends, we will hopefully be able to actually go back to the school system with much stronger teachers, and teachers who are aware of new innovative practices and can apply that to their classrooms.
So there are two related questions. I'm just going through the webinar chat. One is, what about the families who do not have smartphones and parents who are illiterate? What approach are you taking for those? That is one question. The other question is that in states like MP, about 70% population won't have proper access to digital services or phone or internet access. What can we do about it?
Yeah, so I mean, great questions. I think those are things that we've been trying to solve over the last couple of weeks. There are a few ways that we've been trying to solve that question, right? One is, I mean, the reality is, you're exactly right. I mean, we've surveyed and we found that 50 to 55% of parents don't have smartphone or data access. We've also found that a lot of families have returned to their villages and hometowns, right? So we've actually lost the children from the cities or from the schools, and there's actually no way to contact them. So that's also another issue. So kind of the first step that we're trying to take is, for the children where we do have access to their parents and they have access to smartphones, let's make sure that we can make sure that they continue to have access. because they're also running out of money to pay for continued data access, right?
Absolutely.
So we're also setting up, I think some of the conversations we've been having across a couple of nonprofits is to say, can we actually think about CSR that might want to support at scale a collective of nonprofits that might want to provide some kind of financial support for data, you know. And there are telecom companies, there are other organizations that want to provide direct relief, but a lot of the direct relief is on cash transfers or rations, right? And data access or data connections are not very expensive. And if we can get together as a collective of nonprofits to say this is kind of the set of parents, the number of parents across multiple cities, then going in with a collective voice, you know, might be a powerful way to tackle this issue. So one is just making sure that children have access, continued access to that data. The second is to then say, well, if you have 50% not even accessing, how can you actually continue to reach out? And that's where, when you engage with the teachers directly, I think some of this is just hand-to-hand combat, right? The teachers, whether they are government teachers or our people teachers, we're actually putting in place structures to actually handhold them and help them understand how they can actually reach out to all of their children and how they should troubleshoot, right? So if the parent doesn't have access, most of the kids are living in slums, right, or very low income areas. So there will be a neighbor that has access. So what are the right types of questions that you should ask? So you can actually make sure that you're getting to about 75% of kids in your classroom.
There's one interesting question about the digital classrooms that you are conducting, or the digital content that you are sending. What is the engagement like? And have you identified barriers in terms of students not understanding the questions and exercising and hence not participating?
So far, we've seen really positive early indicators, right, of how students have responded. I mean, it's been amazing to just see the success stories from the field and from teachers themselves, because we've had teachers send us snapshots of completed homework, and they've been able to create a dynamic because we've handheld them through this process of how to actually send. So I think the secret is, don't overwhelm a child with too much material, right? You need to be very clear. You need to kind of send one video and one worksheet. You need to have a clear timetable for a week of what subject you're sending on what day, right? What we've suggested is one subject a day at the same time, so that the child starts developing a routine. Send a video, send a worksheet, the child does that, provides that back to the teacher. Teacher provides corrections back. And so just setting up that dynamic, while it sounds very simple, it's actually hard to do at scale. Right? And so to the extent that we've seen that work, we've seen early indicators of that over the last through the Reach and Teach program. And so that has given us the hope that this can actually be replicated as we look at expanding it in both South Delhi as well as Madhya Pradesh. Priya, I think you're muted.
Sorry, yeah. There's one more question around motivation of the teachers to want to learn and to want to experiment with new things in this time. Is that something that you see in your work right now? I saw a bunch of WhatsApp messages that you had sent, which teachers had been sharing with you. But do you see that as an ongoing issue? Because motivation of teachers has been talked about quite a lot in this space.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to really build on is the momentum within governments, because governments are very energized to actually do things, and they're very action oriented at the moment. Everything we've heard is how do we go direct to children, but how do we also use this time to seize this opportunity to actually work in a more meaningful way with teachers? Because we've actually had conversations where the pull is from the government, it's actually been much easier to roll out. And then it's very important to, I think implementation is critical, right? Because when you're actually dealing with scale, how are you actually going to layer the process? So for example, you can't just announce that you're getting these e-modules up and then expect teachers to actually download them.
Yeah.
So it's something as basic as, I think there was a question from Ashish on the chat around, in Madhya Pradesh, digital access is an issue.
Yes.
Right? So we've actually worked to create an offline option, right? Where teachers can actually access the content when they're offline, also download it and offline access.
Hmm.
uh, but I think around the motivation point, there has to be clear steps in your implementation execution plan, where you are laying out, you're making it very simple for the teacher to access the content. You're giving them enough incentives. We have a certification that they receive after they complete every course, so they feel more motivated.
Hmm.
Then going to supplement a lot of these e-modules with learning circles and kind of a government commendation of the person who has done well with participation and so on. We'll analyze the data on the back end using analytics. So I think it's not just the rollout of training, teacher training in an online fashion, but it's also what is the entire supporting infrastructure that you put in place that's actually going to motivate the teacher to participate in this, and not just have this be another government circular that goes out.
Yeah, you've answered part of a question that came, two questions actually, on what are the best ways to train the teachers? Is it online? Is it calls? Is it video? Is it WhatsApp? What are things that have worked? And you talked about having offline component of this content, but what are other ways you have explored and have worked well?
So we've done a lot of teacher development and teacher training work in Delhi, and we have done some amount of it in Madhya Pradesh. What COVID has provided is now an opportunity to really scale this statewide. And as we were thinking, so it's a completely different problem when you have to scale this at such
Yes.
massive scale.
Yes.
And the most important thing is it shouldn't be just a program which has limited impact. Right? So how do you scale while also ensuring that the teacher is actually going to learn something and going to engage with the content and remember it by the end of the second month?
Yes.
So what we've actually done is to not just have a set of videos, but actually for every training capsule that we have created, there is a pre-work component, um, a module component, an application component where we demonstrate what it means to actually apply that concept in a classroom environment from one of our partnership schools in Delhi, and then a post-work component. So this is what that training arc looks like for the teacher. The way that we've built it is the teacher can do it at their own pace. So they don't have to do everything in one shot, because the reality is that they will also have, home responsibilities. They may have their own issues with internet access, so on and so forth. And so just giving them that flexibility to do it at their own pace has been has helped tremendously. I think this is the first step of getting this right. The second step is all of the measures that will go into the government supporting this initiative even after the lockdown ends, right? So when it is a government program, the government is itself thinking of this as a new way of training that is going to be sustained in the future. Because currently, some of the training, you know, doesn't happen in a consistent manner across districts or across schools in the government school system. So digital training provides this entirely new opportunity, but it also does have to be supplemented by, in-person coaching, support, peer reviews and peer circles, rewards and recognitions, all of that. So what we're going to see as the next, so the first phase is really these modules, and then the second phase of this is going to be the layering of all the supporting infrastructure. And the third phase is actually going to say, well, now that schools are open again, how does this training continue to evolve so that you can bring in human interaction as well?
So, do you see that as a leader in the education sector, do you see that this will dramatically, the current situation will dramatically change how we view education? Do you think it would be what demonetization was to mobile payments? Would this be a push towards traditional education?
Priya, your voice broke up a little bit, but I think what you were essentially asking was whether, how this would shift education, the perception of education. Um, so, initially in the initial days of the lockdown, I think everybody was just getting used to the shock of what was happening, right? And getting used to quote unquote a new normal, and they all felt that, well, maybe this is just going to be what the new normal is, and we just have to get used to the um, a digital way of working. I think now that this has been in place for a while and we've seen it play out in other countries as well, um, I think that individuals are beginning to understand the strengths and weaknesses of different systems. They're beginning to understand they're beginning to kind of see for themselves what works well about direct learning in schools and classrooms, and then what are the aspects of digital learning that will help a child learn more effectively. So I see this as an opportunity for us to actually um, get some tremendous learnings out of what we're going through, and actually to strengthen our systems when the lockdown and the crisis is behind us, so that we can actually innovate and bring some of the learnings back into the school systems. Having said that, I think India is an extremely diverse country. So also hard to have, also hard to kind of have a kind of a general, um, takeaway on this, because urban rural is so different, access to data is so different. But certainly, I think that there are learnings that will emerge which will shape the way that we deliver education in the future.
Got it. I had one question. There are a couple of questions which have come around your work, and I'm thinking if time permits, we'll take them a little towards the end. There was one question I wanted to talk about how your team, how they work, how has that evolved? Because a large majority of your team was out in the field working with teachers, children, government. How has the lockdown affected them? And how have you guys creatively changed the way you work? What kind of things have you tried as an org to improve the efficiency and morale of your team? What has worked? What has not worked?
So I think everybody just misses, seeing their colleagues, right? Day in and day out. They just miss their colleagues. I think that has to be said. Um, uh, as much as we do the virtual stand-ups and team meetings, I think there's just that ability to connect in the office, or in the schools, which everyone is missing quite a bit. Having said that, um, we've done well in reorganizing ourselves into these three task forces, right? On the community outreach, on the direct student learning, and then on the teacher training. So what we've actually done is we've taken the same team and basically given them a major in terms of a task force or a particular, one of these three initiatives. And that's actually worked really well. We've found we've mapped people to particular one of these three areas, based on their experience and based on their strengths, and it has worked quite well. We're seeing the team, because we're scaling at a faster rate than we had previously planned. The team is actually working much harder than ever. But what's been great about this is that we've seen hidden talents emerge on from various members of the team, right? So suddenly we've had, teachers going off and actually creating bite-sized videos on their own, or providing voiceovers, and coming up with innovative ways of delivering content. So it's been great to see some of these hidden talents emerge. And I think people are also enjoying the fact that they can potentially do something that's outside of what they have been doing for the last couple of years, right? So they're also getting exposure to
New areas. Yeah. In terms of your conversations with the government and the partnerships, a lot of that is in person meeting, connecting. And do you see that there is a lot of interest from the governments to want to do expedite some of the work? And how have that interaction changed for you guys?
So I think because we've been working for a while in these two geographies specifically, and we've been working very closely with governments and government partners in both geographies at all levels, kind of at the most senior bureaucrat level as well as at the level of the cluster academic coordinator.
Hmm.
Uh, those relationships have taken a while to establish, right?
Hmm.
But it's been, but those relationships have been established,
Hmm.
and so uh, it's not that we are having to build a new relationship, and therefore it's easier to actually just transition from having a conversation in person to now getting used to actually having a conversation on Zoom
Yes.
or wherever, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
We're WhatsApping with our government colleagues much more than ever before. I think I'm overwhelmed by the number of WhatsApp groups I'm on right now. Number of messages that come on those groups.
Yes.
But yeah, I think we've just all had to embrace the reality of, there's no way around it. You can't actually meet in person. It's not an option. So
Yes.
you have to figure out an efficient way of making sure that you continue to stay involved and in touch.
So one of the biggest questions that almost everybody has asked me is how will it affect funding? And what should nonprofits do to survive this small to medium term blip in their journey?
So one of the things I would say is just really plan out, um, just doing some financial planning to really understand your cash flow position, right?
Hmm.
For the next for the next 12 months, right?
Hmm.
How much cash do you actually have? How much funding do you actually have? When is that funding going to come in? How much do you have already that's confirmed, and how much are you, still waiting to get confirmations on? So I think the first is really doing some financial planning and scenario planning, and accounting for, you know, CSR evolving and potentially, uh, either supporting the scale up of one of your projects or not supporting one of your other projects, and making sure you're doing enough scenario planning.
Hmm.
Uh, I think the second, so I think that's critical because you really need to figure out, uh, you know, what your cash flow position is going to be like. The second thing I would say is just being conservative with regard to hiring,
Hmm.
right? Just um, for an organization that's in the growth phase, I think I've heard other nonprofits kind of put a lot of hiring plans on hold, right?
Hmm.
Because they just want to be conservative and they just want to kind of see how things go,
Hmm.
right? Also, it's also much harder to onboard new staff members because you don't actually have a physical space where you can kind of walk them in person. It's very hard. It's harder to
Hmm.
actually onboard someone virtually, right?
Hmm.
Especially in the education sector where there's a lot of field work or school work.
Yeah.
You can't really get them to come and see a school.
Yes.
So I think those are a couple of ways. I think the third is on funding. Certainly, there's a lot of uncertainty out there among many nonprofits about um, you know how those conversations and the funding commitments that they might have, or the donors that they were speaking with, where those decisions might land,
Hmm.
and whether some of those resources might get reallocated.
Hmm.
Um, so, what a lot of organizations are doing is just to make sure that that conversation continues with each organization or partner that you've been working with,
Hmm.
and making sure that you get enough visibility into their decision making,
Hmm.
so that together with CSR, you can figure out, what the implication of that might be for your organization.
Hmm. A lot of people have actually taken this time to rethink about the work that they're doing. Is it relevant in the short term? Is that the right focus for them in the short term and medium term? And relook at some of the programs that they're learning. We ourselves are sort of in that phase right now to see what are areas that we want to double down on and what are areas that we sort of take a pause. Um, do you see that you are going to be continuing in the same strategic direction that you were going in, or do you see yourself taking a slight change in the direction in the way you were going based on this experience of working remotely with teachers and looking at the data and the numbers that you're getting?
Um, I think our strategy doesn't change.
Hmm.
Our mission and strategy doesn't change. I think the plan for scale and the sequence of particular interventions might change
Hmm.
based on how things are playing out and how they might play out in the future.
Hmm. Got
Uh,
it. Okay. Okay. Um, what does this mean for your current and future employees right now? When it comes to funding changes, a lot of us are in a space where we don't know if we have money for the next 6 months, 8 months. What are types of measures you have taken to ensure that there is continuity for the current employees? You talked about hiring, that you have to slow down a little bit on the hiring. Uh, but what are you doing today for your current employees?
Yeah, so I mean, we're fortunate to have a really, we take a lot of time to actually hire. And so we've been able to actually build a really solid team
Hmm.
uh, that, you know, has worked together for a while and have contributed heavily to the way that the programs have actually delivered impact. Um, so our approach right now is really to say that the team that we have right now is the team that's actually going to deliver on our programs, and we need to make sure that the team is protected, right?
Hmm.
Because we are also, the reality is that governments are actually asking us to scale faster than we
Yeah.
had planned. So we
Yeah.
do need we do need high quality talent to be delivered to be able to deliver against those programs, which is why for us as an organization, I think the approach that we're taking is
Hmm.
to be conservative on the hiring side,
Hmm.
but make sure that on the existing team we're actually preserving and protecting that team as much as we possibly can.
Hmm.
uh, and hence, where there is capacity,
Hmm.
making sure that we are directing them or redirecting individuals to these task forces,
Hmm.
right? So everybody's productivity is also kept at a sufficiently high level.
Got it. Okay. There's one question that I had in mind on asking you if you had a list of asks from the government partners or from your donors, what would those asks be?
I think from donors, I think one ask would certainly be just to provide visibility and transparency around future funding commitments,
Hmm.
right? Even so, first of all, will the partnership continue,
Hmm.
right? And if the answer to that is no, would love to know that sooner rather than later,
Yeah.
so then come up with a plan B or a plan C, right?
Hmm.
I think that's that's one ask I would have. The second is just a bit of flexibility, right,
Hmm.
in terms of deployment of resources, because we're also seeing the situation evolve and new needs emerge. I mean, as communities and governments are themselves trying to figure things out and respond to the emergent situation,
Hmm.
I think nonprofits are doing whatever they can best, and CSR as well, whatever they can to actually best respond to these needs.
Yeah.
Uh, but that requires a little bit of flexibility, because then you need to be able to shift your resources to the areas of maximum impact.
Hmm.
So I think that's the other ask that I would have.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Do you see that there is going to be a lot of effort going on COVID, but that will sort of take away a lot of the funding from the current different thematic areas that are there? And how do people deal with it? Because there would be a lot of areas which will get impacted.
Yeah, and I think it will manifest differently over the next 6 to 9 months, right? So, for example, one could say that right now a lot of focus is on immediate relief work, but
Yeah.
in 6 months' time, maybe when the economy gets hit, and I hope not too badly, but there could be a focus on livelihoods,
Hmm.
right? And so, within a short period of time, you might just find that um, you have to respond to different needs in terms of where you would put your CSR resources.
Yeah.
Um, so I think what would be helpful is for CSR to also just maybe choose a couple of areas where they might how based on their scenario planning themselves, right, and based on how they see the situation emerge,
Yeah.
just for them to also identify a couple of areas where they would want to actually focus over
Hmm.
the next 6 to 12 months, right,
Hmm.
as see the situation evolving.
Hmm.
Uh, and accordingly, then think about partnerships that they want to
Hmm.
uh, develop and organizations that they might want to speak with.
Yeah.
Because um, I think that clarity also probably right now, I think CSR might be under pressure to kind of immediately respond.
Hmm.
And so just taking a step back and saying, well, yes, maybe there's immediate relief work that we need to do, but then as an organization and
Hmm.
as progressive CSR, what would we like to see ourselves doing in the 6 to 9 month period based on the scenarios that we forecast?
Yeah.
Do we want to rebuild education systems or health systems, or would we want to kind of pivot to livelihood support, and so those types of questions are worth asking now.
Yeah. So a lot of governments across the world are looking at economic SOPs for the various areas of work, from small, medium enterprises to mid caps and to large caps. Do you see something like that emerging for nonprofits as well? And if no, then what would you sort of think of as a good relief package for nonprofits?
Yeah, that's a great question and a tough one. um, I think I think there are thousands of nonprofits in India and working across sectors, and I think the ones that are operating in a niche space are probably going to be hardest hit,
Yeah.
right? And so, if there is, but to the extent they're working on a very important, urgent social need,
Hmm.
uh, there is probably a need to actually support those organizations, because the likelihood of those organizations actually running out of cash pretty soon
Hmm.
is probably really high.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I think if one were to triage relief, you may want to just look at the niche organizations that are doing specific work,
Hmm.
high impact, and see if there is a way to save those. It's almost like the SMEs of the corporate
Of
sector.
the yeah, of the corporate world. Yeah.
Really,
Uh,
but yeah.
there are, thank you. It's a tough question, and I know that probably very early right now to think about these questions. There are a couple of questions around your work, and I thought, given that we have a couple of minutes, we have some time, I thought we could take them. One of them, a couple of them are around M&E on, because this is when you do in-person trainings and in-person programs, you can measure impact in a certain way, but right now you're disseminating to the teachers who are disseminating to the students in a completely offline slash online mixed world.
Yeah.
How are you measuring the impact? Is there a monitoring and measurement model that you have developed? Is there also a monitoring or a feedback loop that you've built, which is sort of coming back from the teachers to you guys? How have you built something like that?
Yeah, so M&E is actually foundational to all the work that we do, right? So even as we're thinking about these, and so what's challenging is how do you actually make sure that you're always doing a baseline,
Yes.
uh, even before a digital e-training capsule gets rolled out,
Hmm.
right? So we actually put a lot of thought into
Hmm.
what does the baseline look like,
Hmm.
and what are the right types of questions that you can ask before the teacher actually embarks on any kind of training,
Hmm.
and then what does that post training survey look like. And the trick to doing that is to develop the right questions that can't actually be gamed, right? Because again, this is something that the teacher um, will fill out online,
Yes.
but it's almost like looking at teacher behaviors and then seeing to what extent you're going to be able to shift those behaviors. And so what we've actually done is, when we do the baseline, a lot of the questions that we ask, they don't have any, there's no one right answer. So it's a bit hard to game, right? Because we're asking a set of statements and
Hmm.
answers to those statements. And then after the work, we actually, relay the test again. And then we get to see whether those mindsets and behaviors have actually changed. Um, so there is actually, I mean, even when you're rolling out some of these programs at scale in a digital manner, there's always scope to actually have um, strong M&E processes in place and structures. And so that's one of the things we've been doing. Even with the direct student outreach, there is a way to actually get a sense of whether that child is able to, um, you know, continue to make progress in that particular concept that you've taught. I think it just has to be very clear how that's going to happen, and that has to be worked in.
The other bit to it is also how do you measure your reach? Because in this case, you don't know how many people it is going to.
Yeah. So there again, I think we've tried to structure that. So when we actually reached out to, for example, the STMC teachers, what we've done is we've created dissemination channels of how the content gets to the kids. There is a layer of education officials and mentor teachers that have been set up in the system. So we've also put together a set of metrics for them to track in terms of number of children reached out to, number of phone calls made, number of student responses received. So there's still, and that data is being collected and then regularly reported weekly back to the department so that they can actually track. The question is, how reliable is that data? So what we're going to be doing is actually working with the department to actually just do kind of a spot check or a random sample to actually check how accurate that data is.
Got okay. If there are any other questions that people have, please share. We have about 8 minutes, so we may be able to take one or two more questions. There is an interesting question around that Delhi government has an extensive program to upgrade the school system. How do you collaborate with them?
So there is so the Delhi government. So Delhi is kind of unique because the corporations manage the primary schools, and then Delhi government manages the secondary schools, and then also has some K-12 schools that they work with. What we've been doing so far is really focused on primary in Delhi, and kind of gradually also enter the elementary space. But because we've been very focused on primary, we have been primarily working with the corporations, the municipal corporations. The Delhi government itself has done, a lot of work. I mean, just by way of looking at the education budgets having increased, they have shown a lot of interest and will to actually make sure that that education remains a priority. So we are learning, sharing to the extent that we can, plugging into that work and talking to other nonprofits who are also working in the secondary space in Delhi. Yeah.
Got it. There's a very interesting question. What is the urgency to try to jump into virtual remote technology with at this time? Isn't this summer vacation time? And why don't you let the kids be kids? And I'm a mother myself, and I'm sort of thinking maybe a valid question to ask.
Yeah. So, I mean, in both the geographies that we work in, the summer vacations only come mid-May, June, right?
Yes.
So it's actually critical learning time that's actually getting lost.
Yes.
So this was actually happening during summer vacations. We wouldn't be as worried, but this is actually the possibility of children losing 2 months of learning time. And if one looks at the background of the children, given the fact that many of them are first generation learners, every day counts for them. Every day of learning that doesn't happen is a day lost in their lives. And also when a child doesn't learn for an extended period of time, because what is likely going to happen is for 2 months they've been out of school, summer vacations will start. So that means 4 months without learning. There will be a huge dip in their recollection and their conceptual understanding when they ultimately go back to school. So it's almost like you have to then undo 4 to 6 months of learning loss. So the burden on the system is just going to be so significant. And I think what we're trying to do right now is just to minimize that learning loss for a child.
I also feel that when there is a structured definition to a day, the child is also not feeling the other psychological impact of COVID that could be around. Everybody's in close quarters. There's a lot of conversation going on, and if there is a small part of them which is sort of spending time in learning new things, probably could have a better impact on them.
I think as a mom myself, I'm getting a lot more visibility into what my kid does, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Somebody has asked about penetration of TV and that kids are staying at home, they're watching TV. have you tried exploring TV as a unit of education?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So Madhya Pradesh has actually been working on radio, right? And also Doordarshan. Uh, so we haven't done it ourselves, but I know that some state governments and some nonprofits have actually been thinking about it.
Yeah.
Right? We actually create radio channels which have educational content, which kind of beam out messages, and state governments are also saying how can we leverage Doordarshan better, right? This is all interesting stuff to work through.
Yeah.
There's just so much content out there, so it's also hard to find the right content that is meaningful, and
Yeah.
there are many children at varying learning levels, right? What
Yeah.
is the right content that you get out, and how can you make sure that it reaches the child,
Yeah.
uh, and it gets to the right level of the child. The thing that we are actually toying around with in terms of direct outreach to parents and kids is IVR, right? Given that data might be an issue on smartphones, can
Yeah.
we think of IVR to send short messages and instructions? That's one of the things that we're actually looking into. We haven't quite figured out yet, but it's something that we're exploring.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have one last question that I want to take. So, if in the audience, if they were CSR heads, if they were people who are other nonprofits, if there are people from government, how can they partner with you? And how can they help you?
So please write to me. I can, put my email address here. Would love to, understand what your areas of interest are and how you would like to partner. There are 10 different ways of partnering, and we've created the 3 task forces exactly for that, which is around community outreach, direct to student learning, and working at scale on teacher development and teacher training. So this is kind of our approach, which is a short term, medium term, and long term.
Yeah.
And we need support on each of these 3 areas. And we're also looking for partnerships in each of these areas. So as CSR, would love to have partners on board who are looking to make a difference and also engage deeply with governments who are progressive and intend to also react quickly to COVID. And those are the governments that we're working with. I think in terms of other governments, if there are folks on the line, would just love to understand your needs and see if there is a way for us to help. For nonprofit leaders, I think there's already a lot of great collaboration happening in the sector. And as a collective, there is so much more that we can do and build off of each other's work. So again, just please write to me. My email address is kruti.barucha@peopleindia.org. I will put it in the chat, or perhaps Priya or Ajit can. And, and we'd love to hear from you, and we can.
Thank you. So there are a bunch of questions that we weren't able to take on today, and I'm hoping that I will send it out to you, and we'll find a way to answer these questions. Yeah, your email address is there in the chat. And thank you so much to the audience for some very interesting questions. It was great listening to your listening about your work and how swiftly have you and your organization have changed tracks to say these small, medium, long-term strategies. Really interesting to hear about them, and all the best to you and all the best to everybody else in the panel. We all need to come together and figure out a way to work with each other. I'm hoping that we can take learnings from this session, ask more questions, figure out more partnerships with each other.
Thank you, Priya. And thank you to Priya and Ajit and Akshay for pulling this all together. I think it's great to have a community of individuals come together and see how to work together on these issues. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kruti. Thanks, Priya. Thank you.
Bye.